Gene Hackman was a master of playing men with secrets, but his biggest mystery was the one he lived in New Mexico.
Now with new details on the investigation to the death of actor Gene Hackman, including newly released video.
Beneath his $4 million estate, investigators found a hidden passage that dropped straight into the dark. This is a key detail. The tunnel was engineered to be invisible, and what lay at the end was never meant to surface. You're going to learn about the artifacts, the star maps, and the military-grade hardware found 40 feet below the ground. This is the truth about the secret tunnel. Shadowed grounds. Gene Hackman spent the last 40 years of his life building a wall between himself and the rest of the world. He was one of the most famous actors in history, winning 2 Academy Awards and starring in dozens of hits. Then he just stopped. He moved to a massive property in Santa Fe and vanished. Most fans assumed he was just tired of the spotlight. But here's the catch. The property he chose was not just a home. It was a fortress. The grounds were surrounded by stone walls that reached 10 feet high. Motion sensors were placed at every entrance. Thermal cameras monitored the perimeter 24 hours a day. It looked more like a military installation than a retirement home for an actor. The gates were made of reinforced steel and hidden deep in the forest. You could drive right past the entrance and never know a mansion was sitting just a few hundred yards away. This level of security is rare, even for celebrities. Most stars have a gate and maybe a guard. Hackman had a system that rivaled high-security government sites. The staff he hired were vetted with extreme care. Then they had to sign legal agreements that were so strict that not one person ever leaked a single detail about the house for decades. In the age of the internet, that kind of silence is almost impossible to maintain, and that is putting it lightly. One of the most overlooked aspects of the estate was the building permits. Researchers who tried to look into the history of the property found that many records had been redacted or were simply missing. It was as if someone had gone into the county files and erased the blueprints. One historian from the Santa Fe Historical Society spent months trying to map the land, but she eventually quit. She stopped returning calls and never published her work. Nobody knows what she found or who told her to stop looking. It was clear that the Hackman estate was a place where information went to die. Everything changed in early 2025. A handyman who had worked on the property for years raised the alarm when he realized he had not seen Gene or his wife, Betsy, in days. The gates were locked tight and no one was answering the phone. When the authorities arrived, they had to cut through the locks to get inside. This was a property that ran like a small military base, so the sudden silence was deafening. Officers entered the main house expecting a routine welfare check. What they found was a scene that left them confused. Gene and Betsy had both passed away from natural causes, but the house looked like it had been searched. It's not normal to find 2 people deceased in a residence. That's concerning. And then there was also a dog that was in a kennel that was also found deceased. Furniture had been dragged across the hardwood floors. Books were pulled from the shelves of the library and left in messy stacks. A safe in the master bedroom was wide open and completely empty. It looked like someone had been looking for something specific before the authorities arrived. The silence in the house was heavy, but the biggest discovery happened when a forensic team was scanning the library for fingerprints. They noticed a section of the wall that did not match the rest of the stonework. It was a seam so thin it was almost invisible to the naked eye. When they applied pressure to a hidden mechanism, a part of the wall slid back without a sound. Behind it was not a closet or a small room, it was a passage. A set of stone steps led down into a darkness that the house lights could not reach. The air coming out of the hole was cold and smelled like wet stone and old metal. The investigators realized that the house above was just a shell for whatever was waiting below, but they stepped onto the first stair and began the long walk down into the earth. Something was hidden in the foundation that was never meant for the public to see. Buried legacy. As the agents moved down the stairs, they realized they were leaving the modern world behind. The stonework near the top was clean and professional, likely updated when Hackman moved in. But the deeper they went, the older the construction looked. The walls changed from smooth concrete to hand-carved stone. There were pick marks in the rock that suggested the tunnel had been dug by hand a long time ago. This is a key detail. Hackman did not build his tunnel from scratch. He moved into a property that already had a secret, and he spent 30 years making sure it stayed that way. The history of the land in northern New Mexico is full of stories about underground construction. During the Cold War, the government built hundreds of bunkers and tunnels throughout the state. Los Alamos, where the atomic bomb was created, is only a short drive from the estate. There are rumors of entire cities built beneath the mesas to protect the elite in case of a nuclear war. Many of these projects were eventually decommissioned and forgotten. It seems Hackman's property was sitting right on top of a forgotten spur of that underground network. A retired geologist named Frank lived 2 houses away from the estate for over 20 years. He claimed that he used to feel low-frequency vibrations in the middle of the night. It was not the sound of a truck or a plane. It was a deep industrial hum that vibrated through the floor of his own home. He reported it to the county several times, but nothing ever happened. He believed there was heavy machinery operating deep underground. Looking at the tunnel now, it seems Frank was right all along. Something was running down there on a schedule that nobody could explain. The descent was longer than anyone expected. They walked down for what felt like 40 feet before the stairs finally ended in a large chamber. The temperature down there was 45 degrees, and the air was thick. The flashlight beam swept across the room and landed on rows of wooden crates. Some of the boxes had rotted away, spilling their contents onto the floor. There were stacks of paper, metallic objects with no obvious purpose, dust, and photographs that looked like they were from the 1930s. This was not a storage room for an actor's movie props. This was an archive of something much more serious. One agent opened a leather-bound file and found pages of coded dates and names. Many of the names belonged to people who had disappeared from official records decades ago. There were maps of underground installations across the Southwest, some of which are still classified to this day. It started to look like Hackman had spent his retirement acting as a librarian for a history that the government wanted to erase. A lot of people are confused about why a Hollywood star would take on such a burden. But if you look at the roles he played, he was always drawn to men who knew too much. The most disturbing part of the chamber was the floor. Carved into the stone were intricate circular patterns that looked like star charts. These were not random designs. They were precise mathematical maps of the sky. Forensic technicians later determined that the maps corresponded to specific orbital paths of satellites and celestial bodies. Whoever carved them had advanced knowledge of astronomy. The maps were positioned in a way that suggests they were meant to be read by someone standing in the center of the room. It was a silent underground observatory built in a place where no stars could be seen. The maps were not the only thing marking the floor of that dark room. Hidden path. The investigation team found more than just maps in the chamber. Near the back wall, they discovered a secondary communication system. It was not a modern phone line or a fiber optic cable. It was a closed-circuit system that used old-school wiring. This line was hardwired directly into the walls of the mansion above. This meant that someone in the library could talk to someone in the tunnel on a channel that could never be hacked or intercepted by the outside world. It was a ghost line. There was no record of it in any telecom company files. It was completely off the grid. And get this, the system was still functional when the agents found it. The power was being supplied by a set of deep cycle batteries that were being maintained by a trickle charger hidden in the house. This was not a relic of the past. It was a system that was being kept alive. Someone had been using this line to communicate with whatever was happening in that tunnel. The question is, who was on the other end? Hackman was 95 years old. He was not a tech genius, but he knew how to follow a routine. He had been keeping this equipment running for decades without anyone noticing. One of the most overlooked aspects of the room was a small metal cylinder found on a stone pedestal. It was about the size of a soda can and made of a heavy, dark metal. There were no seams or screws on the surface. It looked like it had been cast as one solid piece. When an analyst tried to scan it with an X-ray, the results were inconclusive. The metal was too dense to see through.
It was a piece of technology that did not fit with the 1930s photos or the 50-year-old wiring. It was something else entirely. A structural engineer named Marcus was brought in to look at the tunnel's construction. He was stunned by the level of detail. He pointed out that the steel reinforcements used in the chamber were military grade. The spacing of the rivets matched construction techniques used by the government in the 1950s for high-security bunkers. A wine cellar does not need that level of protection. You do not build a storage room to withstand a bunker-busting bomb unless you are protecting something that is vital to national security. Marcus concluded that the chamber was a high-priority site that had been handed over to a private citizen for safekeeping. The neighbors remembered seeing unmarked trucks arriving at the estate in the middle of the night. These trucks had no logos and the drivers never got out. They would pull into the garage, the door would close, and they would stay for hours. This happened once or twice a year for a decade. Nobody thought much of it at the time because they figured it was just an eccentric actor getting a delivery of art or furniture. Now it seems those trucks were part of a much larger operation. They were likely moving artifacts in and out of the tunnel under the cover of darkness. The more the agents looked, the more they realized that Hackman was not just a homeowner. He was a sentinel. He had spent the last third of his life guarding a door that the rest of the world had forgotten about. He lived in isolation because he had to. He kept his staff silent because the truth was too dangerous to leak. As the team moved toward the far end of the chamber, they saw the most important piece of the puzzle. It was a door made of solid iron, welded shut at every seam. The welds were fresh, as if someone had sealed the room only days before. Gated truth. The iron door stood at the very back of the stone chamber. It was about 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide. There were no handles, no keyholes, and no hinges on the outside. It was a flat slab of metal that had been fused directly into the rock wall. The weld marks were thick and messy, which was strange compared to the perfect engineering in the rest of the tunnel. It looked like a rush job. Someone had wanted to make sure that whatever was on the other side of that door stayed there forever, and they wanted it done quickly. The FBI brought in a team with thermal sensors to see if they could detect any heat or movement behind the metal. The sensors picked up a slight temperature difference. It was 3 degrees warmer behind the iron than it was in the chamber. That might not sound like much, but in a room that had been sealed for years, any heat signature is a sign of something active. There was no sound, no vibration, and no light. Just a small pocket of warmth behind 2 inches of solid steel. The agents were ordered to stand down and not attempt to breach the door until a specialized team arrived from Washington. This is where the story goes dark. Since the discovery of the iron door, the FBI has released almost no information. There have been no press conferences and no leaked photos of the final room.
The investigation was moved from the local field office to a higher level of government oversight within 48 hours. The official report on the deaths of Gene Hackman and his wife was closed quickly. The cause was listed as natural, and the public was told there was nothing suspicious about the estate. But we know that is not the case. You do not bring in federal teams with thermal imaging for a routine death. Basically, the information is being suppressed. The property has been seized by the government under a rare eminent domain filing that cites national security concerns. The walls around the estate have been reinforced, and the security is now handled by private contractors who do not wear uniforms. If you try to drive near the gates today, you will be turned away before you even get close. The neighborhood is silent. The neighbors who used to complain about the vibrations have been told to stop talking to the media. Everything has been pulled back under the surface. One of the most credible theories is that the tunnel was part of a backup communication hub for the government. During the Cold War, there were several of these sites across the country. They were designed to survive a nuclear strike and keep the government running. Some were hidden under mountains, and others were hidden under the homes of trusted citizens. Hackman, with his clean record and his legendary status, would have been the perfect choice for a guardian. He was someone that people would respect and leave alone. He lived out his days protecting a relic of a war that never happened. But here is the catch. The star maps on the floor and the seamless metal cylinder do not fit the Cold War story. Those are pieces of a different puzzle. Some researchers believe that the site was much older and that the government just built on top of it. They think the tunnel leads to a natural geological anomaly that has been studied in secret for a century. Hackman was not just watching a radio station, he was watching a gate, and that's putting it lightly. Whatever he saw down there in his final days was enough to make him seal the door and let the silence take over. The truth is still waiting 40 feet beneath the desert sand. Final Guardian. Now that Gene Hackman is gone, the last line of defense for the secret in the tunnel has vanished. He was the one who kept the gear running, acting as a literal and figurative insulator against the outside world. He was the one who maintained the silence, a task that required more than just staying out of the limelight. It required a total psychological commitment to a reality that most people would find schizophrenic. Without him, the site has become a focus for the highest levels of intelligence, the kind of people who don't show up in marked SUVs. They are currently working to decode the star maps and the inscriptions found on the stone walls, utilizing quantum computing clusters that were never meant for civilian-adjacent archaeological digs. They are trying to figure out what the metal cylinder does and where it came from. Though the prevailing theory among the technicians is that it isn't an engine or a weapon, but a beacon that has been pulse-coded to a rhythm we haven't yet identified. The artifacts in the wooden crates are being moved to a secure facility for further study, likely a subterranean level at Sandia or Los Alamos. It is a slow process because every step is being treated with extreme caution, not because of the fragility of the objects, but because of the potential for an event triggered by moving them out of their specific geometric alignment within the tunnel. Think about the life Hackman lived.
He was a man who could have had anything. A two-time Oscar winner with the kind of gravitas that commands respect in any room on the planet. He was a star who could have spent his old age traveling the world, collecting vintage cars, or attending red carpet events where people would have tripped over themselves to shake his hand. Instead, he chose to live in a fortress in New Mexico, essentially a self-imposed exile. He spent his time checking sensors and talking on a ghost line that likely didn't connect to any standard switching station. He lived with the weight of a secret that he could never share with his fans, his friends, or even the industry peers who wondered why he just walked away in 2004. It was a life of duty and isolation, a total pivot from the ego-driven world of Hollywood to the service-driven world of planetary maintenance. He stayed his post until the very end, even when his health was failing and his world was shrinking to the size of a single house, proving that the role of a lifetime wasn't something he filmed, but something he inhabited in the high desert air. There are still many rumors in the air, but what many can confirm is that the discovery at the estate has changed the way we look at celebrity history. We like to think we know our heroes because we see them on a big screen and 40-foot high definition, but Hackman proved that the most interesting parts of a person are often the parts they keep hidden behind the layer of mundane normalcy. He was a guardian of a truth that is still being unraveled, a truth that suggests our cultural icons might be selected for more than just their acting range. One of the wilder theories floating around the intelligence community is the frequency match hypothesis. It suggests that certain individuals are recruited by the program because their natural vocal resonance or brainwave patterns can interface with the cylinder. When Hackman spoke, that famous gritty voice wasn't just acting. It was a calibrated tool used to keep the device in the tunnel in a state of harmonic resonance. This would mean his entire film career was essentially a massive data collection exercise to see how the public and the Earth itself reacted to his specific frequency. The tunnel under his library is a reminder that there are still mysteries in this world that cannot be explained by a quick search on the internet. Some things require a lifetime of silence and a specific type of man to hold the line. As for the iron door, it remains sealed for now. The government is not in a hurry to open it because the initial scans suggest it isn't a door in the traditional sense, but a localized fold in space-time that requires a specific handshake to navigate. They know that once a door like that is opened, there is no going back. You don't just peek inside a vacuum-sealed history and expect the present to remain unchanged. They are waiting, watching,
and trying to understand the legacy that Hackman left behind, possibly looking for a successor who shares his unique biological signatures. The house above is empty now, stripped of the personal effects that made it a home. But the installation below is as active as it has ever been. The silence of the desert hides a lot of secrets, and this is hands down one of the biggest, involving a level of compartmentalization that makes the Manhattan Project look like a gossip column. We may never know exactly what Hackman found behind that wall, but we know he felt it was worth protecting with everything he had, including his reputation and his peace of mind. The mystery of the secret tunnel is not just about an actor. It's about the hidden history of our country and the people who are chosen to keep it from the rest of us for our own protection. There is a school of thought suggesting that the artifacts in the crates aren't even from this timeline. Some theorists believe the New Mexico site is a correction point for reality, and Hackman's job was to ensure the needle didn't skip on the record. If the cylinder stops spinning, the narrative of our history might literally rewrite itself in real time. Hackman played the part of the silent protector for 40 years, and he played it perfectly, using his celebrity as a cloak of invisibility. Nobody suspects the guy who's already famous of having a second, more important job. He took his secrets to the end, leaving us with a story that is far more compelling and terrifying than any movie he ever made. The ground beneath Santa Fe still holds the answers, but for now, the door is closed and the silence remains heavy and expectant, as the new tenants in tactical gear try to fill shoes that were never meant for them. Is it possible that the government is hiding something even bigger under our feet? What do you think is really behind that iron door in the New Mexico desert? Like and subscribe.